of the ox cart.
Record this one.
You won't call it noise in abstract, but call it by its specific names and affections. Referring to it as the noise of the ox carts, Xabier could not find any information that would help him do his research. So he spent, like, I guess, some years, maybe 2 or 3, or maybe 2 years without hearing it actually. Since it's a tradition almost completely lost at the rest of the world, especially in Europe. But once an ox cart driver corrected him, saying that those were not noises, but songs, cantigas, then Google, the keeper of names, did the rest of the job. It took Xabier to the central and northeastern regions of Brazil, where he could not only hear one ox cart sound, but visit a pilgrimage where he would find a still living culture that involved hundreds of ox carts. 6. Aboios. So before we move on, did you hear the sound? Is it too low? Because there was a natural fade in the recording. Could you hear it?
I think it's too low in comparing to your voice. Like your voice is much more intense.
Yeah.
But we could hear it, but it was low.
I heard it well, but people were saying in the chat that it's quite low.
Yeah. But if you could hear it, this is okay. So let me try to explain, I guess, what could produce such a sound, because this is the sound of the aux cards. I'll try to share my screen with you if it's possible. So can you see the picture?
I still only see you. Now, yes.
Let's see. Let's wait. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so this is like my father's family aux card, because what is funny, one of the interesting things about this project is that, as I will speak soon, contrary to what happened to Xabier, I had heard some testimonies about aux cards. I also have never heard the sound itself, but those testimonies were quite close to me. This was not something as distant as it was for him, for instance. My father's family had this aux card, and they were really proud about it. So you can see, for instance, that under the card, what you have is an axis, right? That is the axis is not fixed in the car, and then the wheel spins on the axis. It's the whole structure that spins together. So what you have is wood against wood, right? And the fantastic thing about it is that people who build the cars, which is actually a tradition which is going lost, they were treated kind of like luthiers, you know? You would ask for a car. It seems, I heard lots of testimonies, and I talked to a lot of people during the Trindade trip I did in order to shoot the material for the film. The constructors would be asked for a car, and they were the people who asked for the cars were concerned about how it would sound, because it would, and there are lots of ideas around it. They would it would function, for instance, as an identity. If you were traveling during the night, for instance, you would be recognized. My father, for instance, told me that the elder would recognize people in the village by the sound of the aux cart. And it's really amazing how you can hear this, like, it's really distant from you, and you can already hear most of the high content sound of high in the spectrum of the high pitched sounds. You can hear it like from hundreds of meters away. It's fantastic to that's why I wanted to keep this fade, you know, at the recording. There are even some cars in which they have like an additional structure with which you could tighten the structure as a whole so that it would sound more. So the sound is a very important part of this culture. It's not a byproduct of the whole situation. It's really something with which they are concerned from the beginning for a ton of reasons. I won't go too deep into that because it would took me like a lot of time, and I'm already out of time. So I'll just read one more section of the text. I would have some more sections to read, but and then I'll just skip to the questions part. Okay. So 7. Probably one of the oldest non-strictly musical sounds of humanity. It's probable that some of you never heard this sound, but it reminds you of something else.
O carro de boi na família da gente, o carro de boi sempre foi importante. Para você ter uma ideia, meu pai, que ficava 700 e tantos quilômetros daqui, quando ele nasceu, em outra cidade, e foi de carro de boi. Novinho, minha avó foi, bota o portão no carro de boi, e ele foi batizado nessa cidade, que é antigamente chamado Barracão, mas hoje é Rio Real. E aí, passando isso aí, o carro de boi sempre foi importante, que era o meio de transporte, assim, para cereais, para carregar cereais, para transportar tudo, lenha, que cozinhava lenha, ia buscar lenha no mato, era no carro de boi. E nós temos lá na fazenda, lá onde meu pai nasceu, onde eu nasci, tudo que você conhece muito bem, nós temos aí num carro de boi que meu pai era rapaz e encomendou a um cidadão que era mestre Antônio, que era um mestre de fazer carro de boi.
Sorry.
Que aqui chama chamador de boi, que aí em outra região chamam candeeiro. Era Miguelzinho. Aí o outro carro de boi era Manuel Isaac, que era o carreiro. Entendeu?
Those are the voices of my mother and my father. Those are testimonies about their relation with sound cards, most of them from their childhoods. So I was seated around the 10th row of the room during this very same talk of Xabi's about ox carts at the Oscillation Festival in Brussels. And I heard that he had to wait for years before being able to listen to the actual thing. He got to know about ox cart sounds through literature, also an ancient instrument for field recording. I wondered if he knew that this is a still living tradition in Brazil. Before I could raise my hand to talk to him about that, Xabi mentioned the city of Trindade in Goiás, a state from Brazil, and his own former trips to this country, Brazil. After that, and some conversations, and of course, we are in Brussels, beers, there came the invitation. Would I be in Brazil during July of 2019? If so, would I take a part in the filming process? I would, and I would, of course. I did not tell him this in advance, but as occurred to him, I also first heard about ox carts through testimonies. But contrary to his experience, the testimonies I had access to were my parents, and they came full of affection and familiarity with riding in ox carts. I haven't heard about its sounds, though.
Uma coisa que eu tenho muita muita alegria no meu coração é de lembrar dos meus avós, porque eles realmente eram assim.
My father
Reconhece o
was
como
always
isso,
proud
mas
of the
por
family having an ox cart,
aquele
and I
som
never
que
understood
tá
why.
fulano, nem sei
My mother was moved
pelo
when
som
she
que tá
heard about my participation in this
daquele
project,
fulano. Uma voz
and
uma
after
pessoa,
it
né?
ended, we had conversations about her childhood rides in her grandfather's ox cart. She used to sing with them, she said. Apart from these memories of my parents, the ox cart was completely alien to me, in that I did not get affected, let's say so, by it anyhow. At the same time, it was strangely familiar.
É, exatamente.
70 anos atrás, 71 anos atrás, aquilo ali, ainda mais naquele lugar que nem
Não, pai,
existe no mapa, entendeu?
So for today, that's it. I have written more things, but due to these technical difficulties which I've been facing here, it's better to stop now and to start a 5 to 10 minute conversation. If you have any questions or whatever, I'm here. And then Mike is here.
You never told us, Paulo, when we talked about the recording experience you have with those filming group, that you were particularly close to the theme as a something very emotional for you, maybe something very. You never told us that. That was something that you omit when you talked about it. Why was that?
Yeah, look. They never mentioned, my father never mentioned the sound to me. You know, he just mentioned that, oh, so we our family has an ox cart. And then I heard it, and I did not know by the time, I never knew the value which is attached to it. It's like a part of a sacred ritual. For instance, in Trindade, the city in Goiás, they receive for a pilgrimage, uma romaria. Eles recebem centenas de carros, centenas. Eu estive lá para gravar. There are hundreds of cars, you know. And they come from everywhere. They come from like hundreds of kilometers far away from the city, and they come with their cars. They come hearing it all the time. It's a really brutal ritual. I had no idea at all what was the value of it. What is the value attached? I heard that, and I always thought, okay, it was probably a very important thing as a technology for them. They had no cars, they had no, and yes, they could move like in such difficult terrain as what you would find in the middle of the northeastern states in Brazil. I could imagine that it had an important function, but I did not imagine, for instance, that my grandfather, when he was to be baptized, they took him to another city in one of those ox carts. So I could never imagine, for instance, that my mother, as a child, would sing together with such an ox cart. You know, I did not know that. So one of the interesting things that I find in this collaboration with Xabier is that as he learned something about his cultural past with this project, and it's a project he has been running for the last 10 years, I somehow and very weirdly found myself in a very familiar space, you know. When my mother heard that I would be a part of this project, she started to cry. I mean, did not have such
the
a,
dimension of this. You
yeah.
did not knew the dimension of what was going on, how huge it was for you and for your own history, right?
Yeah, it's something that goes back to to what I've become, because my grandfather was there, my mother was there, my father was there, but I never heard about the sound. And the sound, really, it's not only the sound, right? Because one of the things I want to express with this confusing text is like what could come out of the practice of field recording. What else could it be? What could you find there? And I would say that the sound is one of the things, like beautiful sounds or in sounds that impact you somehow. This is just one of the things that you are able to find. But as soon as you raise your microphones to the sky, like from a close-up recording to an overall, what you hear is a lot of meaning in these sounds, a lot of complexities, a lot of histories, a lot of affections. And it's not only the recorded thing which remains, and we could talk about the problems of it, the problems of recording such a ritual, if I belong there or not, if I have the right to record it or not. We could discuss it on and on. But the fact is, for me, field recording, personally, it had this impact at some point as something that would open a window so that I would not be a tourist, but I would be in the position of someone who does not comprehend what is going on. And somehow this is linked. For instance, in this project, this is intimately linked with what I am, but I don't understand it. I go to it through an artistic and technical standpoint, but then it goes somewhere else. In my fantasies, I understand the field recording is a sort of a tool so that I can not understand more and more. I would have to talk about it for like longer, but this is about it. I did not tell you because I discovered it in the process. That's why. Someone wants to talk, I guess. I don't know who.
GD.
GD? So it's Gabriel.
GD. É o Gabriel Dargante. Não é. Tem um Darth Vader aí, né?
CK would like to speak. Yeah. You are muted. I can't hear you.
If you
Spacebar.
hold down your space bar and
Yeah,
then
you have
hold
to.
it down.
Sometimes it doesn't work, the spacebar.
Yeah.
You punch it and nothing happens. You have to go with your mouse and click it.
Yeah.
Still can't hear Cliff.
Yeah, I can't hear you, Cliff. Sorry.
Use your finger, man, and
Now it looks like he's not muted, but I can't hear him.
Yes, I can't.
Yeah.
Maybe if you
Cliff, Try to take off your phone from the computer.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Your phone.
No, don't hear him.
We can't hear you.
Maybe log out and log back in. Now he's muted
Yeah.
again.
Nope. Sorry. Nothing's going on. Just you saying doing this. Paulo is mute also.
Chat box. Will you ask something through the chat box?
Yeah, he's got a chat there saying something and he's got to go. I see that now.
Okay, galera. Sooner have to go. Thank you, Paulo. My reflection is the following. In this time when we spend so much time in our headphones, either creating or listening, this project speaks to the importance of the communal soundscape, a sound that has an agreed to and understood significance.
I agree.
Yeah, cool. I don't want to talk more and take more of the time of it. But
Well, one thing I see, I mean, I've got a lot of questions, and one thing I see is that this warrants more time and really warrants more of a discussion. So I'm kind of hoping maybe we could, one of the ideas, just thinking out loud again, and how to continue with this is that we dedicate a session just to talking about this, because I can only imagine that, you know, I have some questions, and I think a lot of other people probably do too. And I'm actually also realizing that the sound is pretty good, and there's not, I mean, I've had this problem with Skype that, you know, people start to talk over each other, but I think we're all being quite considerate here. And so that I think there could, it actually presents itself a bit more to discussion than maybe we originally imagined. So with that said, I'm actually going to be a bit more, I think if people really want to interrupt me, I think so long as it's not a free-for-all, that's okay. And I'll stop occasionally to take questions. But before I go, it's still, I mean, I think if anyone's got any more questions, there's no rush here.
I just want to make a comment because something that Paulo was saying reminded me of a very similar situation that I learned about here in Portugal. There's well, Paulo talked about this alien condition, you know, you being a foreigner condition, or how he put it. You don't have to be an alien to be a foreigner. And I discovered by chance also, here in Portugal, there's this tradition of windmills, which are really important were really important in some cities here. And apparently there's this figure of the moleiro, which is the guy who runs the windmill, like he's responsible for keeping it, you know, functioning. And it's also a dying tradition. It's a dying art. No one's doing anymore. And I saw a guy doing a talk. He's doing his, he's a sound artist from Lisbon. I'm not sure if he's doing his master's or a PhD or something, but he's doing it about this. He's researching the sound that exists on the windmills, because the windmills, they have some cabaças, you know, some wooden, some clay jars that are attached to it, and when they spin, they do the whole like whoo sound of a bottle. And apparently the moeiros, they use that as and there's like discussions about even the few moeiros who still exist, they don't agree between themselves if it's a functional thing, like, oh, we use this because depending on the sound, if it's too fast, we know that we have to pull down some of the sails or some of the fabric to keep the windmill from spinning too fast. Some of them say that it's, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's just purely ornamental. And depending on how many jars you put, the sound is different. I tried to find some pictures here while Paulo was talking, and apparently it's really hard to find. But I found one video I'm going to send on the chat. There's no sound of the thing, but at least there's a video that you can clearly see the there's like a whole bunch of wood of clay jars attached to the mule.
You know, another option we could do is maybe start a list, like an email group or something, where people could share these sorts of things. Because I don't know how they're recorded in the chat. Just again, out loud. Because this is kind of nice when people like think, oh yeah, I've got, you know, this is something I'd like to share, and if it gets lost here, you know, that's kind of not useful. So maybe Paulo and I will kind of do a post-mortem after this and kind of figure out what we can do to kind of keep it flowing.
Yeah, it was just a comment on that because I saw him doing the talk and there was a bunch of Portuguese people obviously looking and saying, well, I've never heard of this. I've never heard this sound before. I never even had the slightest idea that this was a thing that existed. And it's, you know, their ox card, apparently.
Paulo, just a formal question. I think you didn't say the name of the book from the quote on number 3, I think, about the conception of the environment or something in the field recording.
Okay, yeah. Let me try to... the name of the book is In the Field. I'll grab it and show it here right now in 10 seconds.
3, 4, 5. Okay. Wow.
So,
damn.
Yeah. It's this book. It's called In the Field, The Art of Field Recording, organized by Kathy Lane and Angus Carlisle. I can, through this mail thing that we are going to organize, I can just send the link to you. But
I put it in the chat.
yes, okay. Thank
you.
This is not the link I want. I want to have a libgen.is.
I guess the nice thing about this book is that it is actually a compilation of interviews. And all the interviews have the same format, the same 5 basic questions that the interviewers do to like dozens of artists involved somehow with field recording. So you have the usual names like Anya Lockwood, Cristina Kubish, Francisco Lopes, Hildegard Westerkamp, Jazz Riley French, Peter Cusack, Steve Feld, and others. It's like, I think for me, it's a very important reference. Okay.
Cool. So if there's nothing more pressing, I'll just launch into it, and I'll try to I'll be a bit short because I think this is going pretty well, and we can always continue this stuff next week. I have a lot of questions, so, but and I'm thinking that if Paulo doesn't mind, we can come back to this and have more of a discussion. I also was interested about this kind of distinction of like the foreigner not necessarily being a tourist, and also this notion of defining the field. And one thing I think, you know, we say, well, this is not a class, but we kind of came up with this idea of the first talk because Paulo was interested in talking about field recording, and I originally came up with a title which was called Transcribing Natures and Histories, this idea of recording the field, and Paulo, understandably so, kind of, you know, questioned the use of words like nature, words like culture. You know, these are words with really heavy baggage. But I think that what's interesting here, and what I'll try to expand upon it what Paulo was saying is this idea of, well, you have to define the field. What is the field that you're observing? Another thing is this idea of, well, what does history here is really important. And one of the projects I'm going to show really is a take on this idea of transcribing a history, just as with the project that Paulo was showing. I'm going to start by reading. I'm going to share my screen here. I think I can share it just with the... Okay, tell me if you cannot see that. I'm looking at a tiling now, but actually I'm going to go to a quote here by Tom Johnson. Another thing is I think you're now going to see the other spectrum of how to present things. In general, my talking style is a bit more casual, and my ideas are kind of a bit more floaty than as well organized as Paulo's. And I think both are really good, both ways of doing things. But sometimes it's nice to just let things flow and let new ideas come to the surface. If I were there in person, you'd see I'd be writing a lot on blackboards. I don't like, I'd be playing a lot of stuff. I kind of like to wing things a bit. So in keeping with that, I'm going to kind of do a different approach than Paulo, and hopefully they'll complement each other quite well. So this is a paper by Tom Johnson. It's called Found Mathematical Objects. And I just want to read the beginning quote here. He says, "The idea is simple. Find an object, any object, declare it a work of art, and it is a work of art. Art becomes truly objective, just an object. Artistic techniques become unnecessary, and the seeds of non-intentional art are planted at the same time. This Marcel Duchamp principle, the ready-made or the objet trouvé, is now recognized everywhere as a perfectly valid way of making art. A generation of Fluxus artists developed this point of view. John Cage adapted it to compose music through trance operations, and it is now quite natural that a composer or artist might choose to work with a found mathematical object, like Pascal's triangle, or the Narayana's series, or some automaton, just as well as with a urinal, a bicycle wheel, a comb, or a bottle rack. But before I explain my own way of using mathematical objects to construct musical compositions, let me to lay the aesthetic foundations a little more solidly." So this is the beginning of a paper by Tom Johnson. And Tom Johnson is, in my opinion, a very important composer of the last, century, and he's still alive today. But I'm actually, the reason I brought that quote in is because this is idea of looking at the ready-made, something that already exists. So this is kind of, I think, a way of extending the idea of what Paulo was saying of what is defining the field and then recording it. So this idea of a mathematical object is, something that exists, and it's not so dissimilar from the idea of recording that object, or at least presenting it in a certain way, or mapping it. And so I think this is kind of a stretching of this idea of recording the field, of a field recording, and this idea, of course, of the ready-made. So I think Tom here is talking really kind of about these Platonic mathematical objects, but my interests somehow lie more in this idea that you can make a conceptual assumption, and I'm not saying this is the way that things are, that the world is computable, so that these objects are not just, Platonic objects, but they are also computable objects. So you could say that about really anything. Again, I'm not saying that this is the way that it is, but rather a way to take an interesting intellectual step to where you can get to kind of interesting territory for composing or what have you. Actually, a quick question, and maybe Paulo can answer this more quickly, is that I'm kind of curious what the makeup of the group is here. Is Paulo, do you know? I can't hear you. You're muted. I guess maybe he's typing something because he's still muted. But
by makeup of the group, you mean what?
Like what are the people here? You know, what type of students or what type of fields are they? Composition or theory or?
I can see, for instance, Magno. He is pretty much involved with computers, art and technology. I can see Cliff, you know him already. Marcelo is pretty much involved with computers, art and technology, especially electroacoustic music and hybridization of whatever genre you would find around, especially pop music, maybe, I don't know. I can see Thais Aragão. Thais, I'm sorry if I'm doing something bad here, but as far as I know, she's a very good scholar, involved with, for instance, she wrote about sound maps in a book which was recently published by Bloomsbury. Yeah, lots of people from
Okay. So it's a diverse group. Okay, that's good. I mean, I just wanted to make sure about that. Also, I think it's a good, that's kind of the point of this seminar. So again, I don't want to be too composition centric here. I do want to talk kind of more generally, broadly about ideas and hit upon kind of, the intersections of art and technology, of performance practice, musicological investigations and things like that. So I'm going to try to really jump between these areas and then try to show the intersection of these things. And hopefully I'll be able to do that. I'm going to play a composer who's my generation. Paulo can potentially pronounce her name much better than I can. Let me make sure I've got the right video here. Let me share my screen again. Her name is Egidija Medekšaitė. She's a Lithuanian composer. I've got two videos of her here, but I want to make sure I've got the right one. If you guys don't hear that, let me know. Actually, I'm realizing this is the wrong video. I wanted to play the other one. Forgive me.
Pradžioje, tiesiog kai pradėjau visą tą daryti, tai buvo labai toksai galbūt emocinis dalykas ir tada galbūt daugiau buvo tokio atspirties taškas buvo labiau tekstilė. Sakykime, jeigu aš įsirinkdavau tekstilės audinį, galvodavau, šitas yra pakankamai gražus ir išraiškingas, tau muzikiniškai galbūt daugiau duotų tokių galimybių. Ir tada galbūt tas audinys, man atrodo, daugiau tapdavo kaip struktūra. Bet šiaip tai, pavyzdžiui, dabar man gali būti jokio skirtumo. Aš galiu, sakykime, jeigu aš turiu muzikinę idėją, ar ne, aš noriu to ir to, ir tada tu galvoji, o koks audinys galėtų būti artimas tavo muzikiniai idėjai. Vienas kūrinys gimsta pagrįstas tekstilės idėja, tiesiog, kai tu gauni, tiesiog susigalvoji audinį ir tada tu galvoji, gerai, aš turiu šitą struktūrą, bet tada tu galvoji, kad jeigu jisai būtų išverptas skirtingais siūlais, tai man atrodo, kiekvieną kartą būtų vis skirtingas efektas ir tada tu galvoji, jeigu norint transformuoti tą į muziką, būtent tada tu be galo preciziškai viską pasirenki, tu tada turi ne vien tik tai struktūrą, bet tu galvoji tada.
Was everybody able to hear and see that okay? Or was it just 2 minutes of silence?
Okay.
Good. So I will, again, I think when we'll make a list, so then I'll share that. I think she says something really interesting at the end there, and she's talking about these textiles, and she says, well, you have this structure, but then you have to choose. At first she's making the metaphor with the threads. She's like, you have to choose the right threads, you have to choose silk, but actually that extends. I think whenever someone's interpreting or writing music, that's exactly what you bring to the table. It's kind of like packing a bag for a trip. You got to know what you're going to take, and then you get all this stuff together for what you need on that journey. And I think that's one of the reasons why she's a really interesting composer. It's not that she's just looking at these beautiful textiles, but it's that she's really, after that, doing these pretty traditional composerly things and then having them performed in these very performative, expressive ways. And I think that's quite nice. But if you look at the video, I'll go back to it right now one more time. If you go back, there's this, you kind of see here these punch cards and these rules, right? So at the core of this, these are really simple machines, and they're algorithms. They're kind of little computer, they're kind of elegant computer programs that she uses to make music. And so there are these two things here that are kind of happening at the same time, which I find very interesting in her work, which is that, at once she's kind of intuiting this idea of machines, because that's what making a loom is all about. That's what making these textiles are all about. And yet she's making this very beautiful, expressive music. So now I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to go back to Tom Johnson. And so this is generally, what I'm saying here is that she's found these patterns. She's recorded this field, so to speak. And she's done it in a very intuitive way. And this, now I'm going to kind of focus this idea of patterns back to Tom Johnson, which is kind of a more sterile mathematical approach. I'm going to play a little video of his.
String quartet. So I want to tell you about tile work for a string quartet. I wrote a lot of pieces called tile work, which means more or less carrelage, pavage, mosaic, in 2002, 2003. And tile work for a string quartet is only one of them. All of the scores have this same 5-note rhythm running around the cover. If you look at the up stems, it says ta 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 ta. And if you look at the down stems, they get tu tu do, 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 same rhythm. And we say that this rhythm tiles the line with itself because you can play, two people can play ta 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 tu tu ta ta tu ta ta tu tu ta tu tu ta ta tu ta ta tu tu ta tu 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 tu. And tile the line you're using can be not just two players, it can be a third player, fourth player, you could go all around the cover and come back endlessly. That's the idea of tile work. Here's the score for the first two variations of tile work for string quartet. When the four players tile cycles of 24 points with one 6-note rhythm, a musical idea generally referred to as a rhythmic canon. And that sounds like this.
So I also want to say that even though it seems like Tom might be taking a bit more of a clinical approach, knowing him, he's also just very much involved with what this mapping is. He talks about scales, and he plays things out on the piano. So again, none of this is removed from the actual processes that we traditionally think of making music. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? I'm going to just pause briefly to see if there's any questions immediately or problems understanding my English. If not, of course, I can just move on.
Maybe can you hear me?
Yeah.
Maybe you could just explain what you mean with mapping.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, I'm going to try to say this in a really, really trivial way. But basically, if you're looking at these objects, these mathematical objects, often they're in the form of shapes or numbers, or in the case that Tom was just showing, this idea of what's called tiling the line. So partitioning, dissecting, making a tessellation of a line. And so you have these numbers, but numbers, are a pretty abstract thing. And so how do you bring them into a musical domain? And actually, I think this is where a lot of really, I'm going to be a little brutal here. I think this is where a lot of really bad music is made, is that people don't understand that, for example, pitches are not just numbers. They're not just colored balls that you choose out of an urn. And this is a really important thing when you're dealing with this sort of material, about how it is that you make music out of these things. And I think it's a really big problem in a lot of music, which there's a lot of now. There's a lot of this, idea of sonicism, of musical mapping, of data mapping. And a lot of it is really used to make pretty trivial art and music. And where I think that people like Tom Johnson and Egidija are really good at is taking it to the next level. So not just saying this is how the number or the process maps to music, but by doing it in a very musical way. But the idea generally of mapping is this idea of a translation from one object to another, in this case, a mathematical object to a musical object. But actually, That's exactly what a score is, if you look at it, or any kind of documentation. It's this transduction from an idea or a concept to eventually, in the case of music, sound. The score is not the work. It's in fact just an intermediary that acts as, you know, a description of the mapping from, in some cases, symbolism, other cases just text, to, you know, how to make music. So it's really a broad idea that I think is ubiquitous in music. And it can be anything. In this case, in this particular case, we're looking at mapping of numbers or kind of mathematical conceptual ideas to sound. But really, another thing I want to point out is it's, again, not just about defining the field, as Paulo said, and it's not just about mapping. It's also really about how things fit together. And I think that's one of the interesting things, and the reason I chose to show Egidija's work and also Tom's work. If you look at these textiles, it's not just that there are these elements, these colors, but there are these patterns and there are these things that weave together. And in the case of Tom's work, he was looking at how, you know, these melodic lines will weave together and link together to completely cover a bunch of pulses on the line. And this is often called tiling, or what are often called mosaics or tessellations. And now I'm going to show a work of mine that's focusing on a particular type of tessellation that are called aperiodic tessellations. And I'm not going to get too much into it, because I think next session, or as we continue and there'll be questions, we'll get into the theory and concept of it. But basically, it relates to what are called incompleteness theorems. So everything I'm about to show relates to the idea that there are truths that cannot be known to be true. This was first founded by Gödel, and this was then extended by a guy named Alan Turing. And Turing kind of showed a worst case of it. And then the third person in this lineage, who I hope to bring in when I get to Rio, if and when I get to Rio, his name's Gregory Chaitin. He actually lives in Rio. And I'll hope to introduce you guys to his work. I'm going to share my screen again. This time I'm going to share the entire screen. The most commonly known aperiodic tiling is this one. It's called a Penrose. It was done by a physicist named Roger Penrose. And you can see these are shapes. But actually, these kind of go back to a more primitive form of this, which are called Wang tiles. Here's an example of Wang tiles. Wang tiles are actually just squares that have colored edges. And the rule is that any adjacent square has to share the same color. And the question, the kind of epistemological question here is, given a finite set of tiles, is there a way?
I'm not able to see your screen.
Oh, really?
Me neither.
I am sorry about that. Let me try again. Well, I'll try the application window. How about now?
I can see only you, but not the screen.
And now. Can you see the screen?
Maybe loading.
Actually, no, I can't.
Yeah, that's strange, because according to Jitsi, I am sharing it. Okay, I will send you guys links then. I'll put them in the chat windows. So there's the Penrose tiling. Oh, it looks like it turned my P into, yeah. And then the Wang tiling looks like this. That is a bit unfortunate because I actually have some images on my computer. I will try one more time, and if not, I'll give up. So now I am sharing my full screen. You guys still don't see it.
We see it.
Oh, you see it now?
Yeah. I see it.
Okay. Okay, so now you see these squares. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Anyway, so this is about, you know, tilings, and of course these are about how things fit together. And they're, again, back to the thread of this, there's a simple, what's called a decidability question, which is, given a set of these square tiles with colored edges, is there an algorithm that will determine whether or not these things tile the plane? And if there are some of these that are aperiodic, it turns out that the answer is no. And it turns out that there are these tilings that are aperiodic. That means they never repeat on the large scale. So I'm actually going to now just share. Now, please raise your voice here. I'm going to share a few minutes of the piece that I worked on over the past couple of years. And yell if you don't hear or see anything. Do you guys see the image of these two plates here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to play this for a few minutes. I'm going to stop it there, just for the essence of time. And actually, this image you see here, this is one of these tilings. But here what I'm doing, instead of using colored edges, I'm using these binary codes. It's basically just black and white. So to wrap up here, so we can open up to questions. And again, we can go into I don't want to get into the details of it, but you know, any of these topics could be a whole year of discussion. But what this piece is, so the first aperiodic tiling was found in 1960, in the 1950s or 60s. So this is a pretty recent mathematics. And since then, there have essentially been this reduction in the number of tilings and kind of an evolution of the history of it. And this is a piece of mine that essentially, what I call it, a history of the domino problem. The decision-making problem I told you before was called the domino problem. And so this is a way at the same time not to just transcribe, you know, this mathematical object or set of mathematical objects, but also to transcribe this history. So I think in this way, it really relates to what Paulo set up, where, you know, he was talking about this field recording project that at the same time recorded this history that he was so connected to. This is another example, maybe that manifests itself in a different way. But what the piece is the piece is an installation, and what you're seeing there, you're seeing these two glass plates that are moving against each other, and when they align in the right way, you see the image, which is the tiling. In the history of the domino problem, there are 6 essentially methods of the tiling, and there are as such different orientations that show each of these methods. And then the project as a whole includes 6 musical pieces that essentially map each of these tilings to a set of music. And I'm doing really simple things, like really trivial mappings of the colors of the tilings and the structure of the tilings to sound. What you're hearing now are electronic realizations, but actually, tell me if you'll be able to see my screen when I share it now. So I'm back to sharing my screen. These are all, do you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. These are actually all meant to be played by people. And you can see they're reasonably traditional scores. Some of them have kind of tuning things going on. But again, for me, this only becomes a piece of music in the realization of the interpretation of the score into sound. One example was what you were just hearing, which were the electronic realizations. But I look forward to the day when, you know, real people play these things, because then it takes on a whole other dimension that, you know, no one could ever account for. Pieces become far from what you originally conceived. So again, I'm going to stop there. And I kind of wanted this to complement what Paulo was doing as, you know, another way of looking at this idea of field recording, of looking at different histories, in this case, a history of a particular epistemological problem. But again, this project and each of these people, you know, their work could be really discussed at length from, you know, I think the performance practice of these sorts of things is really important, because it's really a new type of virtuosity. It's not necessarily based on, you know, how fast you can play, but really more so based on, if nothing else, an open mind and the ability to kind of participate in a group, you know, where there's not a hierarchical structure, but rather much more of a horizontal structure.
Great, Mike. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Michael? We have now that 10 minutes or more, actually, that window for specific questions. Does anyone have something?
Also, questions for Paulo, going back to his work. I think we can kind of treat it as an open discussion.
Well, I have a question for you. It's interesting that you are proposing the idea of mapping as connected somehow to the idea of that idea which I mentioned, which is from the book from Lane and Carlyle, which is the idea of defining the field. So you have something in front of you, but what you make of it is fundamentally connected to what that thing is for you, maybe, or for some some more practical application, like producing a sound installation. You had to choose, for instance, strategies of mapping. How would you conceptualize it so that it would become what it was at the end of the day? That installation with that structure, with the plates, with the glass plates, and so. So my question is, did you foresee the structure of the plates beforehand and then thought about the way to map the epistemological problem that you have so that you would achieve that? Or was it more experimental? Were you experimenting with ways of mapping and then some image of a possible result was produced for you? How was it?
Yeah, and in this, yeah, it's a good question. And in this case, the visual stuff came at the very end. So I've been working a lot with tilings and music for a while, and the music really came first, and the musical ideas came first. In fact, there were some other more primitive musical ideas there before I learned about this history of the domino problem. And then once I learned about it, I just kind of fell in love with it. And, you know, again, I think that this is one place where I really differ from Tom Johnson. Tom is like, oh, you have to hear the math, you have to hear the logic, or I failed. I personally don't think so. For me, all that matters in the end is that end object. Everything else, as I said earlier, is what I call self-help. This journey that I went on to learn about the history of the domino problem was really important to me in the process. I don't think it's necessary for people in much of this music to see all of that. If they only come to the end and see these plates and say, oh, that's a pretty object, that's fine by me. Then to answer your question, so I wanted to prelude with that, I don't work much with visuals. I really have worked much more with sound. I've been more recently doing some installations. And when I was dealing with this, I was first making the music, and I was at this residency in Germany, and I actually had some good friends there I invited people to my studio that were not just musicians, but visual artists and actually curators. And the curators were, in a way, the most helpful. And what I had at that time is I had these printouts, these kind of images that looked like what I showed you of the Penrose tiling or from Wikipedia. And they said, look, I don't understand. They kind of called me out. They said, you've been doing this thing where you're so involved in the music, and here all you're doing is just printing out these images. You know, why haven't you touched the images as much as if you touched the music? And they were absolutely right. And so at that point, I really started working with ideas about how to visualize it. And what I came up with in the end was this idea of what's called visual cryptography. It's a scheme where you have two images that look random, and when you align them, when you move them across each other, you get visual noise, but when you align them correctly, you get this third image. And I thought that was a really nice way to deal with it for a number of reasons. One was I didn't need to show all the images all the time. I could move between the images alinearly. And two, with a method that was also about how things fit together. So I thought that was a really nice way to work. But it turns out it's really hard to do this in the real world. Very easy to do digitally, very hard to do physically. So the technology that you're seeing there are what are called photomasks. They're basically the way that computer chips are made. They're plates with chrome coatings printed at the resolution, in this case, of like 20 microns, which is smaller than a hair. And so then then aligning becomes extra difficult. But I thought that became a really nice visual metaphor about everything else, which is how things fit together. But really that part came together at the end.
Does anyone else? Thanks Thanks, Mike, for your answer. Does anyone have questions for Mike?
Or also, I think it'd be a good time to talk about the next session and suggestions and what you guys would feel valuable. Everyone's also, I see no faces. Everyone's muted, both their video and their audio. It's good to see faces, actually. I kind of like the faces more than the avatars.
Just to give a sign of life here.
Yeah, yeah.
Let them faces come back, please.
Yeah. I think it'd be really helpful to Paulo and I, kind of really what you guys would want to get out of this. Like, what are things that you would like to know about? Because it's not, I mean, this is partially for me, but mainly in the sense that I get to meet you guys, but I think it's much more so for you guys. And so, if there's something that kind of falls within, something that Paulo and I could blab about, or that you guys want to present, I think that'd be super helpful to know.
I have to go soon, but I just have one commentary and suggestion for your post-mortem meeting with Paulo. Because since you guys are playing audios from like from your system audio through Soundflower or Jack or whatever you're using, I don't know if Paulo used it, but Jitsi has an option where you can turn off all the audio processing, which it's really hacky. Like, you put some flags on the URL. So your meeting URL becomes like meet.jitsi.si/your name /& equals AT whatever. It's not very well documented, but I've used it and it's really good. Because
what does it do again? It kind of stops some of the other audio processes? Or?
Yeah, because, for example, when Paulo was playing some of his stuff, when the audio is too low, it adds, Jitsi tries to put some more level on it, and it normalizes and puts compression, and it's mono. So you can pass some flags on the URL and turns everything off. So it works well, but people really have to use headphones for that, because one of the things that it turns off is the auto echo cancellation. And if one person doesn't have headphones on, it's like mayhem. It's horrible. But if everyone's wearing headphones, if everyone's doing their part, it works really well. For things like what Paulo was doing, like playing sound files from your computer, it helps a lot to make it more, it's better to listen to.
Do you have a link with any documentation about it?
I have a mixture of a couple of screenshots and the source code on GitHub where you can find the flags, but I have that written down and I can send you later.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Cool.
But other than that, I have to go, guys, because it's really late here. I'm in a different time zone, so it's nice seeing you all. See you next. Bye.
Bye.
Any other thoughts, comments, suggestions? Is this a good time for people?
Well, it's our 9 o'clock. For me, it's fine. It's totally fine.
I'm gonna put in the chat right now my email address, so that people can email me if they think of anything. Also, I think if one of you guys wants to present, let us know. I think that'd be really cool. You too, Enrique. Like, if one of you guys have been working on something, or, be it musicological or theoretical or with composition or performance, I think you guys should be able to present that.
Invite Thais to present something. Yes, you.
Sorry, guys. I was really busy today, so I got late. I don't know if able to make questions, so not tonight. But maybe I can send you, Paulo, a short proposal for, I don't know, sharing what I've been doing, thinking. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, perfect for me. You were one of the names which I thought of inviting. Yeah. So
Thank
please.
you. So I'll send you something, okay?
Cool. And then, yeah, we'll try to kind of organize so that we can tell you guys what we'll do next week, you know, ahead of time a little bit.
Hello.
We can hear you.
I was just thinking about the tiling thing because I wanted to try some kind of tiling thing with the spoken voice. So I'm just commenting that I didn't do anything using it, but I was coincidentally thinking about some uses of tiling for kind of audiobook stuff, or like text that you should understand the text, but like two texts at the same time, or tiling, or like making differences between what is written on the subtitles, legendas, and what is spoken. So maybe I'll try to do something the next weeks, just to see what happens as
That'd be awesome.
you are working with this. And
there's
also,
so much great stuff there.
And also, I think like you showed just a little piece. So I'm just wanted to comment on that it does interest me to know more, or to get more details about it, or Apollo's presentation also. So if that's it, that is the case also.
Yeah, I should mention, I mean,
To expand on the next encounters.
This was like a 2-year project. I've never done anything so so time consuming, and I never will again, probably because I'm too lazy. And what you see there really is the best video documentation that I could put together in this, where I was living in Mexico City. And but really it's a larger piece where you have this installation that can then be augmented by live performances. And what you're seeing really there is just the screens being pressed against each other. But in the installation setting itself, there's this whole setup where this gets projected big on a wall, but you also see the installation. And they're small. They're like, they're like 6 inches, like 350 millimeters. And so yeah, what you saw there was really the tip of the surface. But I mean, I think, one thing that's cool about what Enrique was saying, and we got to play together several years ago, and it's nice to people can kind of take these ideas or had these ideas independently and really come up and have these different things that happen. And I think that's just what's great about these sorts of ideas. It's like, okay, Enrique really had this idea independently, and now he might do something with it, and it's probably going to be like radically different, knowing some of his interests a little bit. And that's just a wonderful thing to see. I think that's one thing that should come out of a seminar like this, or whatever we're doing, is that we really kind of share and pollinate a lot of ideas. What's really kind of nasty and is to kind of guard ideas. That makes no sense to me. So point being though, it's like, yeah, when I think like Enrique, when you do something, I'd love to see it, you know.
So Enrique, if you said, for instance, you said that maybe we could bring the same topics one more time next week. Is that what did I understand it wrong, or is it what you meant?
Yeah, I would find it interesting, but I don't know. It's just an opinion. I would also like to see other people presenting other topics and works or research. Um, but I wouldn't mind if you could, like, from this expand to one more week.
We'll talk about it, right? But I just noticed that Gabriel, the GED, which is there, threw something in the chat box, and I'll read it. It came to me that tiling is instrumental somehow, as in turning effort into something else. I never thought about objective music that way. Like it's not only about making a system that will create music, but playing around with those pieces and patterns.
Very beautiful sentiment. Yeah, I almost completely agree. I wouldn't have ever said it as eloquently, but yeah, there's so much about the process of doing this that becomes kind of again, I can't find a better word sometimes, but self-help. You know, you get to all these wonderful places. I think that's what happens when you make music in general, to kind of generalize it. Like, you meet people, you get to play music with them, you stay with them, you talk with them, you know, and that's the fortunate experience I had in Brazil when I was there in 2014, meeting, you know, Paulo and Enrique. And that's the same with these tilings. You know, you get to explore them and you kind of learn something along the way. And you make music. And in the end, you do all the things that being a musician is. Get together with people, explore these things, make sound. But I think it's really beautiful what Gabriel said.
So any more questions, any comments? That's it for today. Yeah,
cool. Thank you guys. And nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I wish I was there. We should be drinking caipirinhas somewhere. Maybe people in Brazil don't actually do that. Cachaça. You guys took me to the House of Cachaça in Belo Horizonte. I remember that. I think that was you guys.
Enrique.
I don't remember it.
Yeah, I don't really either.
That's the point, right?
I think that was in Belo Horizonte. Is there a place called the House of Cachaça? There?
No, actually, there is a house of Cachaça in Rio.
Maybe it was in Rio then. Maybe it was you.
Yeah. I don't remember that, actually.
Is there one in São Paulo too? I don't know.